Okay. First, there is an attendance sheet, so please sign that. I posted two required reading materials. One is about the principle of public key crypto, and another is about Diffie-Hellman protocol. And I also post RSA algorithm, but it's not required to read that. So this will be the last class on security basics. So today we're going to talk about the problems with public key crypto and hash functions. The next week we are getting into the network security part. We're going to attack several network protocols based on what we have learned, what are the security objectives. So last class we talked about man-in-the-middle attack on DH protocol. We also discussed the public key crypto. We showed how we can use it to do encryption, decryption, and more importantly, we showed how we can use it for digital signature. The reason usually we do not use a public key crypto to do bulk encryption is because they are relatively slow. So we just use it to exchange symmetric keys. So this class, we will talk about public key infrastructure, just very high level, several important concepts there, and hash functions. So let me remind you how this asymmetric or public key crypto system works. First, Alice wants to talk with Bob. So Alice will generate some message she wants to send to Bob. And Alice will use Bob's public key to encrypt this message, and the ciphertext is transferred to Bob, and Bob will use his own private key to decrypt this. Only Bob can decrypt this because only Bob has the private key, which is a pair with the public key. So the problem with this system is, even though we don't need to negotiate a symmetric key, or Bob doesn't have to send a secret key to Alice, still Bob has to send his public key to Alice. So this is a weak point in this protocol. So what if Eve, who is malicious here, she somehow make Alice believe that Eve's public key is Bob's public key. So in this case, Alice will encrypt the plaintext using Eve's public key. However, she believes she's sending that message to Bob. Then Bob cannot really decrypt this message, and only Eve can decrypt this message and have access to the secret Alice wants to share with Bob. So to solve this problem, security guys, they come up with this idea of a public key certificate. So basically, public key certificate binds the pairs of the identity and the public key. So for example, Alice's certificate will have Alice's identity and also Alice's public key. Then how can you verify this certificate is valid? Then we use a digital signature. Someone who has authority, someone who we trust, will sign Alice's certificate to prove that this Alice's identity is actually associated with Alice's public key. So whenever a user, they want to use public key system to receive message, and also they want to do digital signature, they need to register their public key with some kind of authority. And the user will receive a digital signature on the document that includes this identifier for this user and the user's public key. So the authority that issues this certificate is called certificate authority. In most cases, people just call it a CA. So the public key infrastructure is the framework that discuss how users can accept each other's certificate, how we can agree on the common certificate authorities. Because if your certificate is signed by one CA, then the receiver, the sender should also trust that CA. And also what kind of data format the certificate and the signature should be. Sure.
I'm kind of confused. So, who is the certificate for? Like your bank?
It could be your bank. It's basically here. It's just some trusted third party. So you have to trust him. And also, how can you trust him? Maybe that authority is certified again by someone you can trust. So there is a chain of trust. Okay. So we're going to show that in a minute. So like I said, this can form kind of a chain of trust. For example, this is your public key. You want to share it with someone else. Then you have to get it signed by some trusted third party. And the trusted third party will attach the digital signature with your public key and form this your identity certificate. So how does that CA sign this? He will use his own private key to sign that. Then how can you verify this one is valid? You have to use the CA's public key to verify that. So we come back to the problem, how do you know this CA's public key is valid? Then you need to go to check the CA's certificate. And that CA's certificate look like this, which is verified by another entity. So eventually, in this hierarchy, there are some entities, we call them the root of trust. You have to trust them to start the verifying process. And the entity which we give them root of trust, they have this root certificate. So how does this work in real life? Let's say we launch Chrome or Firefox. We type https www.asu.edu. So we can see that there is a green knock here. That means we are having a secure communication with the ASU server. So ASU server, web server is not really authenticating you in this case, but your browser is authenticating the ASU server. So ASU server is proving to you, I am really the ASU server. I'm not a phishing website. So if you click this button, you can, this is on Chrome, you can view other information that tell you this page is secure, valid through HTTPS, and you can view the certificate. So if you click here, you are not viewing your own certificate. You are viewing the ASU website certificate. So if we click that, this is how the certificate looks like. So there are much more information. I didn't include that. So basically, there is ASU's public key and a digital signature signed by someone has more authority. So in this case, ASU's certificate is signed by this entity called in common RSA servers. And this guy's, so if you click here, you can get this guy's certificate. And this guy's certificate is signed by User Trust RSA Certification Authority. And this guy's certificate in turn is signed by this guy. And in our browser, we treat this guy as the root of trust. So we trust this guy's certificate unconditionally. So you see, the important thing here is eventually this verification process has to stop at some point. And that point is that root of trust, root of certificate. So when you install a new operating system or you use a new browser, normally they already include some root certificate. So though, for example, if you use Chrome, then the root certificate, they are trusted by Google. If you use Firefox, which means they install those root certificate, means they trust that. And you can also add your own root certificate. So this is a screenshot on Windows. So you can add on the control panel, there is a certificate, and you can import new certificate. And those certificate you import there will be treated as a root certificate, the certificate of the root of trust. So far we have been discussing public key system and secret key system. So we showed that the symmetric key crypto systems, they are very fast because basically they are just doing substitutions and mutations. However, public key systems, usually they are very slow because we say they are doing very complicated calculations. So even though asymmetric key crypto system, the public key crypto system, it has many advantages. You don't need to share a secret key, which is difficult, but because of its slow, it cannot really replace symmetric key crypto. So in reality, we are using symmetric key system, public key system, and a DH protocol altogether. So basically, they complement each other. So the next topic we are going to talk about is hash function. So hash function is not really an encryption method, but it's equally important because so far we discussed the protocols we discussed, they can provide confidentiality. They can encrypt and decrypt, so the eavesdroppers, they cannot get access to your sensitive information. And we also show that the digital signature can be used to prove authenticity. However, there are other security objectives we want to achieve, for example, integrity. And normally we use another function, hash function, to do that. So basically, hash function, any hash function, is just a method of compressing strings. So giving arbitrarily long input. This hash function will return a fixed length output. So the input is your message, your data, and the output is called the hash value or digest because it's much shorter. It's like an abstract, a digest of your data. So here is how it works. You have an arbitrary long message, send it to a hash function. We will use a H to denote this hash function, and it will output a fixed length output. So usually, the output is much, much shorter than the message. And currently, the hash function we are using, normally they have an output of 128 bits, 116 bits. SHA-2, they have a longer output. Even though this is still a very large space, if you remember IPv6, the IP address has 128 bits. It's still very huge, but compared to everything, infinite, the input space, this is very small. So some example hash algorithms we are using every day, including MD5, stands for message digest, SHA-1, secure hash algorithm, and SHA-2. So SHA-2 is actually a set of hash functions with different output lengths. So we said that no matter how long is your input, the output is always the same. So if you have a 20-letter password, you want to log in ASU's website, and ASU may choose to hash it with MD5 because ASU does not want to store the password in plain text or even in ciphertext. So if you hash a 20x password, you get a 128-bit output. If you run MD5 on a 20 megabyte PDF file, you still get a 128-bit digest. Even if you run MD5 on your whole hard disk, which has 1 TB data. So you treat it like a data stream and use MD5 to calculate the hash. The result is also 128-bit. So this is a problem, and this is also the property we want. So hash function maps infinite input space to a much smaller output space. So this function has to be one way. There is no way you can calculate the original message from the hash value. There is no way for you to do that. So it's very easy to understand. If you have a 128-bit digest, obviously it's impossible for you to get the 1 TB hard disk data. It's not possible. And another problem is, because it maps data from a huge space to a much smaller space, according to the pigeonhole principle, which states if n items are put into m containers with n is greater than m, then at least one container must contain more than one item, which means it's inevitable that some pairs of input, they will be mapped to the same hash value. And when that happens, it is called a collision. So this is inevitable. But if we try to make the output space bigger, it will be harder for us to find those collisions. But in theory, it's inevitable. So there are many hash functions. You may have used some hash functions in your programming analysis class. I think it's 340 or 345. So in that class, you may have been using some hash functions. But in this class, we are talking about strong hash functions that can be used for crypto purpose. So what are the desired properties of good hash functions? So first, we want the hash function to be easy to calculate. Even if you want to apply it on 1 TB data, it should give you the answer really quick as symmetric key crypto system. The second property is called pre-image resistance. So pre-image is actually a mathematical concept, so you don't have to remember that. And later I will show you some examples for you to better understand this. So basically it means given a hash value, it is computationally infeasible to find a message that this message's hash value is this. So this is a little bit different from what we discussed just now. Just now we were talking about it cannot get back to the original message. Here we're not talking about getting back to the original message. Any message that can generate the same kind of a hash value would be okay. And a good hash function should offer this property that it's hard for you to generate any message that matches a given hash value. And the third property is called weak collision resistance, or second pre-image resistance. So it says that giving a message, so here we're giving a hash value, so here we're giving a message, it is computationally hard to find m prime such that m and m prime's hash value are equal, and m is not equal to m prime. So basically we are saying that we want to find a collision. But in this case, we know the original message. We want to find a collision targeting at the original message. And the fourth property is called a strong collision resistance. So basically, this property requires the hash function to be computationally difficult to find any two messages that they have the same hash value. So this property is stronger than the third property. If your hash function offers the fourth property, it guarantees the third property. However, in theory, actually, it's very hard to prove the hash functions we are using, they can meet those kind of properties. We choose to believe they meet those properties because so far we haven't found a better way to attack it. So let's look at some examples to understand those properties. The first one, giving a hash value, it is computationally infeasible to find a message, any message that has this hash value. So imagine we use the ASU website example again. So ASU website stores the hash value of your password because it doesn't want to store the plain text or ciphertext. So even if attacker can compromise ASU's website and he can steal this hash value of your password, there is no way for him to find your original password, or there is no way for him to find any other password that has the same hash value as your password. So why this is important? Imagine you are reusing your password on different websites. I believe many of you are doing that. So if your password the hash value of your password is compromised on ASU's server, the attacker still cannot log into your other website account because he cannot get your password. He only knows the hash. However, in reality, even this property is hard to maintain. So that's why you heard a lot of news that the password is compromised, and in most cases, the compromised password, they're not talking about the plain text password, they're talking about the hash value. So even the hash value is compromised, there is a way for them to extract your password or some string whose hash value is the same with your password. Basically, they can do brute force attack. So there is a project called Rainbow Table, so to help you to crack password based on this. So the second property is given an original message M, it is computationally infeasible to find another message M prime such that their hash are the same, however the messages, they are not the same. So imagine this scenario. A party attests a document M, which means I verify this document is actually written by someone. So to do that, I will publish a signature on the hash of the document. I do not do a signature on the document itself because the document could be very, very long. So I do a hash of the document, so make the signature also very short, just the size as the hash. So if this property does not hold, then it would be possible for an attacker to generate another message M prime. And this message will have the same hash value as the original message. So in this case, an attacker could get the party to attest the original message M. Then the attacker can claim that the party actually, the party attested to the message M prime, so which is not true. So this is why the second property is also very important. So I will give you an example of a hash function. And for you to better understand what is a good hash function, I'm going to show you what is a bad hash function. So first, the hash function we have is just very simple. Everyone can understand this. With any input integer, we just modulo number 8. So why this is a hash function? First, let's prove this is a hash function. So it can take any arbitrarily long integer as input. So if you can map anything to integer, then you can use this hash function. And the output is just a very small set from number 1 to number 7. So basically just 3 bits. So with arbitrarily long input, this function outputs 3 bits. And so this is a hash function. However, this hash function does not provide the property of a pre-image resistance. For example, if I have a hash value h, let's say h is 7, it's very easy for us to find an integer whose hash value is 7. We know that 7, if we input 7, it will output 7. If we put 7 plus 8, 7 plus 16, they will always output 7. So it's very easy for us to find any message that has a given hash value. And this function also cannot provide the second property either, which states that given a message m, not the hash value, it's computationally infeasible to find another m prime. So let's say if we have a message which is 57, so we don't even need to calculate the hash of 57. We know that 57 plus or minus 8 or plus minus 16, they will generate the same hash value. So this function cannot provide the second property. And the third property, which is the strong collision resistance, which means it's hard for you to just find the 2 messages that have the same hash value. So this is also very simple for this function. So any integers, if they have a distance of 8, we know that, or distance 8 or distance of 16, we know that we can easily, we know they will have the same hash value. So one of the reasons this hash function is not secure, but not the only reason, is because the output space is really small. So there will be a lot of collisions. So the output space is only 3 bits. That's why in reality, we are using big output space, usually 128 bits for MD5, and the MD5 now we do not consider it as secure anymore. So we are advised to use the SHA-1 or SHA-2, which they have much longer output values. Usually can, I think SHA-2 can even be 512, yeah, 512 bits. So if we make it very long, the output, make the output space very large, sometimes it's unnecessary, and it will introduce some kind of overhead. But if it's too small, the output is too short, we will lose the property of strong collision. Even though in theory we haven't proved that any hash function can provide this in theory, but we know that if it's too short, it is guaranteed that they cannot provide this property. So obviously, there are other features a good hash function should have. For example, for any input, the output should be uniformly distributed in the output space. So it will be hard for crypto analysts to use a statistical method to learn. Okay, any question?
No.
Okay. So this is the length of hash output, MD5, proposed by Ron Rivers again in 1991. So he has been the leading researcher in cryptography for many years. He invented the RSA, MD5, R4, a lot of other algorithms. So this one, MD5, has 128 bits, and it provides weak collision resistance. but it has been proved that it is vulnerable to collision attack. So someone in 2005 published a paper in Crypto, which is the most prestigious conference in crypto. They proved that we find a way to find collisions. And SHA-1 was developed by NSA, and the first version was proposed in 1993. It's called SHA-0. Right now, a lot of us were using SHA-1, and also we are using SHA-2. SHA-2 has many different output space, and SHA-1 and SHA-2 are proved to be vulnerable to collision attacks. And actually, SHA-3 is coming, so I guess we're going to use SHA-3 in the future. So how we can use this hash function? We learned what is hash function, why they are important in security. So we said that secret key crypto, public key crypto, we can use them to encrypt and decrypt, so it can protect the confidentiality. Obviously, hash function cannot do that directly. So if we use hash function to encrypt ourselves, we cannot even get the message back. So, but hash function can be used for integrity checks. Even though it cannot really prevent or deter modification of information, it can be used to detect any modification of a message. And also, it can be used to prove authenticity. So we know public key can do that, but we can also design some protocol based on hash function to do that, which may offer better performance. So the first application of a hash function, integrity check. Imagine that you are working on a file. Then you save it to your Dropbox. How do you know the next time you open that, it is still the original file? No one modified that. So the way to do it is you calculate, when you save the file, you calculate the hash value of that file. And you have to store this hash value separately in some secure place. The next time you open this file, you calculate the hash value of the retrieved file again and compare those two hash values. So if those hash values match, you say, okay, the file has not been modified. However, this is not always true. It's possible that the attacker modified this file in a very clever way that it generates the same hash. But that's why we need a good hash function. So usually we believe a good hash function will prevent that. So in my own research, I'm more like an operating system guy. I work on system security. And Bernard here is working on system security with me. So we do something similar, but we do not check the integrity of files. We check the integrity of Linux kernel code. So for example, if you run your Linux, and there might be a lot of ways to attack the running system. There might be rootkit. There might be all kinds of malware to add or insert malicious code into your kernel. So how do we know that the kernel is unmodified? There is no malicious code there. So first we compile the kernel, and we know this is a clean kernel. We compute a hash value of all the kernel code. Then at runtime, we will continuously check the kernel code regions, compute the hash of it, and compare that with the hash value we know is valid. So if the hash value match, we know we are still in a secure system. If it's not, it means our system has been compromised. So using hash to do integrity check, we cannot really prevent attacks, but we can detect. We can know that if there is an attack. So the next application of hash function is we can use it to help digital signature. So in 2007, LIST, in a document released, they said that modern collision resistance hash functions were designed to create a small fixed size messages so that a digest could act as a proxy for a possibly very large variable length of message in a digital signature algorithm, like ISA. So what does that mean? So we showed an example before, how Eve can replace a block in a ciphertext from his company from her company to her bank. So Eve can use that to do some malicious. So we said that one method to defeat that kind of attack is Eve's company can sign this plain text, use the company's private key, and send this to the bank. So the bank can verify this by using the company's public key. So in this case, the bank always knows that this message is from the bank or it is from someone else, like Eve. But the problem here is we're using plain text encrypted with the company's private key. So the output, we call it signature. The output will have the same size of the plain text. So what if the plain text is huge? It's 1 TB. Then the signature will also be 1 TB. That will be a huge problem. So a better way to do this is Eve's company will first run a hash function on the plain text. Even if you have a 1 TB data, you will only get 128 bits of a hash value. Then you sign this hash value, not the plain text, with the company's private key. So the signature in this case will be very small. It will be just less than 20 bytes. Then you append this signature to the original plain text, send it over to the bank, and the bank will decrypt the signature using the company's public key, which will give the bank the hash value. And the bank also have the plain text. Then what the bank is going to do next is the bank will also run the hash function on the plain text again, generate another hash value, and compare those two. If those two hash value matches, it means first, the plain text has not been changed. If the plain text has been changed, it will generate a different hash value. And the second, the message is actually from Eve's company, because only Eve's company can sign it with the private key.
The signature after encryption, once it's encrypted, you said it's 20 bytes?
Yes, because the signature should have the same input as the same size as the input, right? So in this case, the input is just a hash.
So when you encrypt with the private key, it keeps the same, it's kind of like Asymmetric, it keeps the same output
Yes.
size? Okay.
Yes. That's how you can decrypt. Otherwise, if it maps to a smaller output space, there is no way for you to decrypt that, right? So yeah.
How does the bank get the plain text from
So
the computer first?
So the plain text has to be sent over here through the insecure channel.
With the signature.
What?
With the signature.
What is the signature?
No, with the signature.
Yeah, what is the signature? Yes.
I thought the plain text on that. So the plain text goes through a hash. You get
No,
that,
the plain text doesn't go through. Oh yeah, sorry, goes through the hash.
and then it gets encrypted by the private. And then it just so you send the plain text along
Yes.
with the signature.
Yes. So obviously, in this simple protocol, we are not providing confidentiality. So because I want to explain what is integrity and authenticity here. But if you want to encrypt this part, it's also fine. So we already explained this part. If the plain text has been changed, the hash would not match. So the third application of hash function is something called message authentication code. It's kind of like a digital signature. It provides authenticity and integrity at the same time. So the scenario to use this is there is no public key infrastructure. So the sender and the receiver, they do not have public key or private key. They are only using symmetric key crypto here. So we assume that the sender and the receiver, they already share a secret key. And they can they want to, the sender wants to send a message to the receiver, and the receiver can verify that this message has not been changed, and this message is actually from the receiver. So we did the same thing with the previous example using digital signature. Here we are using just a symmetric key crypto. So how can a sender do that? The sender will first compute what we call an authentication tag. So basically, it is just the key concatenate the message and goes through a hash function. That will be the tag. Then the sender will send the original message. Again, here we're not talking about confidentiality, so we're not encrypting this message. So we send this message and the tag over to the receiver. So the receiver side, it's very easy for the receiver to verify. The receiver will take this message, and the receiver also knows the key because they have this shared key in the first place. The receiver will do this calculation again and get a tag and compare if the computed tag matches the received tag. If they match, which means the message has not been modified, so you can imagine that no matter a man in the middle, they want to modify either the message part or the tag part, the receiver can detect that because it won't match. So the receiver verifies they match, then he knows this message is actually from the sender because only the sender knows the secret key I shared with him. And also the receiver knows this message has not been modified. So that's three examples, applications of hash function. Later, when we design secure network protocols, you will see that they have been widely used in real-world protocols. So we have finished our security foundation part. So I was trying to keep it simple because I don't believe you have to know everything about crypto. You don't need to know everything about number theory to actually use those cryptos to design secure protocols. So starting from next week, we will first attack existing protocols to see what kind of problems they have, if they can provide the security objectives we discussed before. We talked about 5 security objectives. We are going to say if they can provide it. If they can't, what are the ways for us to attack that? Then after that, we will design secure protocols, secure versions of those protocols using the crypto basics. Cool. So that's it for today. So please sign the attendance sheet. Yeah. Oh, cool.
Go ahead.
Yes.
My name.
Really? Because I poured this out last night. So, okay, you can write it down.
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
It was on the last one.
Oh, so your first name starts with Z or?
M.
M? That's weird. Okay, I will double check.
Okay.
So can you print your name there so I can double check?
Okay.